For weeks, a suffocating tension had been quietly strangling the royal household, a palpable heavy dread that even the most stoic staff members could no longer ignore. King Charles, a man whose entire existence is predicated on order, tradition, and the meticulous preservation of the crown's image, had reached his absolute breaking point. And the target of his wrath was the one person the world believed was untouchable, his wife, Queen Camilla. According to explosive insider reports, the decades-long romance that survived global scandals, public hatred, and institutional resistance finally shattered in a confrontation so severe that it ended with Camilla being ordered out of the palace, forced to strip the historic wedding ring from her finger in the dead of night. To understand how the ultimate royal survivors turned on each other, one must examine the catalyst of this spectacular fallout. In recent months, Camilla had reportedly been executing a quiet but aggressive consolidation of power. She was stepping out of the king's shadow, orchestrating solo engagements, delivering unvetted speeches, and maneuvering through the press landscape with a terrifying new autonomy. In the civilian world, a wife acting independently is normal. In the labyrinthine, highly controlled machinery of the British monarchy, an unapproved narrative is an act of treason. The royal institution relies entirely on absolute control. Every word, every gesture, and every appearance is calibrated to protect the sovereign. The match that finally ignited the powder keg was a reportedly unauthorized, deeply candid interview given by the Queen Consort. Without seeking the approval of the king or his senior communications directors, Camilla spoke openly to the press about her role, her influence, and her vision for the future of the monarchy. It was not just the content of her words that sent shockwaves through the palace. It was the defiant, unapologetic tone in which they were delivered. She sent a blindingly clear message to the world. And to her husband, she was no longer willing to be a silent accessory standing in the background. When the king was made aware of the insubordination, the fallout was catastrophic. Charles had spent his entire adult life preparing for the throne, agonizing over public perception, and attempting to modernize a fragile institution while keeping its ancient dignity intact. To see his own wife, the woman for whom he had risked the entire monarchy, going rogue and bypassing his authority, felt like a profound betrayal. The confrontation inside their private chambers was not a standard marital disagreement. It was a devastating clash of power. According to palace insiders, Charles, a man usually known for his reserved, deeply internalized frustration, erupted in a rare visible display of absolute rage. His face flushed crimson, his voice echoing through the stone corridors. He demanded answers. Why had she circumvented the palace? Why was she suddenly acting as an independent sovereign rather than a consort? Camilla, entirely unbothered by his rising temper, refused to retreat. Known for her icy composure, she stood her ground, arguing that wearing the crown of a queen consort did not mean taking a vow of silence. She fiercely defended her right to shape her own legacy. But Charles was immovable. This was not about an interview. This was about loyalty, the chain of command, and the survival of the crown. As the argument spiraled out of control, staff members standing in the corridor froze in absolute terror. Many had served the family for decades and had never witnessed the king lose his composure so completely. Then, in the heat of the agonizing moment, Charles crossed a line of no return. Looking at the woman he had loved for over 50 years, he demanded that she return her engagement ring and leave the palace immediately. This was no ordinary piece of jewelry. Camilla sported a whopping historic Art Deco diamond upon her finger. It had once belonged to the king's beloved grandmother, the Queen Mother. For nearly 2 decades, that ring had been the ultimate symbol of their endurance. It represented the battles they had fought, the public vitriol they had survived, and the ultimate victory of their love over the rigid constraints of the royal establishment. To demand its return was not just an insult. It was an attempt to erase their history, For a torturous second, Camilla did not speak. She did not move. She simply stared at the king, her eyes locking onto his as she processed the sheer gravity of his demand. Then summoning the quiet, unbreakable dignity that had allowed her to survive 30 years of tabloid crucifixions, she slowly reached for her left hand. She did not argue. She did not weep. She did not beg for forgiveness. With chilling silence, she slid the massive diamond off her finger, placed it heavily onto a nearby antique table, turned her back on the King of England, and began to pack. That night, Windsor Castle was plunged into covert chaos. Camilla's private staff worked at breakneck speed, gathering only her absolute essentials. There was no time for logistical discussions, no time to brief the press secretaries. The emotional weight in the room was suffocating, with some aides reportedly fighting back tears at the surreal destruction of the royal marriage playing out before their eyes. Rather than waiting for the morning light to provide a dignified exit, Camilla chose to vanish into the dark. Security footage from that evening allegedly captured the Queen Consort slipping out of the palace through a private entrance. Accompanied only by her most trusted lady-in-waiting and a solitary royal protection officer, she stepped into a blacked-out vehicle. There were no farewells. The car simply dissolved into the English night, leaving a fractured monarchy in its wake. Inside the palace, Charles remained completely isolated in his chambers, refusing all visitors. But by sunrise, the royal household was in a state of absolute unmitigated crisis. Senior advisors were summoned from their beds. Emergency strategy meetings were convened behind locked doors. The damage control protocols were initiated because this was no longer just a broken marriage, it was a constitutional public relations nightmare. Prince William and Princess Catherine were immediately briefed on the situation. The Prince of Wales was reportedly deeply troubled. He understood the crushing weight of the crown on his father's shoulders. But the sudden exile of the Queen Consort was a destabilizing shock to the entire family structure. Meanwhile, the British press, armed with an unparalleled instinct for royal blood, began circling. Camilla was noticeably absent from her scheduled morning engagements. Whispers of a catastrophic row began leaking from the palace kitchens to the news desks of London. The communications team scrambled to draft a holding statement, desperately trying to buy time. But behind the frantic PR maneuvers, a dark, looming question hung over Buckingham Palace. Was this merely a temporary, explosive argument, or had the King and Queen reached the permanent end of their reign together? To truly comprehend the catastrophic weight of that ring sitting abandoned on a table in Windsor, one must rewind the clock and examine the brutal decades-long war Camilla fought just to have it placed on her finger. The love story of Charles and Camilla is one of the most polarizing, scandalous, and resilient sagas in modern history. She was the woman he had loved since the early 1970s, the woman he lost to circumstance, and the woman he ultimately tore the monarchy apart to reclaim. But when she finally stepped into the royal fold, the ring she wore was not just a piece of platinum and diamond. It was a highly contested symbol of legitimacy. It was proof that the ultimate royal outsider had finally conquered the establishment. In the late 1990s, the British public was entirely unwilling to accept Camilla Parker Bowles. The psychic wounds of Charles and Diana's spectacularly tragic divorce were still raw and bleeding. Camilla had been successfully branded by the global press as the ultimate villain, the Rottweiler, the shadowy other woman who had deliberately destroyed the fairy tale marriage of the century. Diana's tragic death in 1997 only immortalized her status as the people's princess, elevating her to a state of near sainthood. Diana's infamous panorama interview, in which she stared into the camera and declared, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," had permanently glued a scarlet letter to Camilla's chest. For years, Camilla was a prisoner of public hatred. She was subjected to unimaginable vitriol. Women threw bread rolls at her in supermarkets, and the tabloids dissected her physical appearance with ruthless cruelty. To the traditionalists inside Buckingham Palace, she was a walking liability, a toxic reminder of the scandal that nearly brought down the House of Windsor. But Charles possessed an unyielding, almost obsessive devotion to her. He had lost her once when he was forced to marry Diana to satisfy the establishment, and he flatly refused to lose her again. Enter Sir Michael P. Charles's ruthless and brilliant private secretary in 2002. Initially tasked by the old guard to create distance between the prince and his mistress Pete, quickly realized that Charles would burn the monarchy to the ground before he abandoned Camilla. So the strategy shifted from separation to infiltration. Operation Ritz was launched, a meticulous, years-long public relations campaign designed to slowly, methodically brainwash the British public into accepting Camilla. It required navigating the disapproval of government officials, the Church of England, and most terrifyingly, Queen Elizabeth II herself. The late Queen had never bothered to hide her deep disdain for Camilla. To the stoic monarch, Camilla was the architect of her family's greatest public humiliation. In 1998, the Queen attended a 50th birthday party for Charles, fully aware Camilla was present, and deliberately made zero effort to acknowledge or speak to her. It was a freezing display of royal rejection. But Charles waged a war of attrition. He simply refused to back down, forcing his mother to face the reality that Camilla was a permanent fixture in his life. By 2005, Queen Elizabeth reluctantly surrendered to the inevitable. During a New Year's holiday at Berkhall, his Scottish estate, Charles finally dropped to one knee and proposed. When the engagement was officially announced in February 2005, it shattered historical precedent. The ring he presented her, the 1930s Art Deco masterpiece featuring a square-cut central diamond, flanked by diamond baguettes, was a direct transmission of power. By gifting her his beloved grandmother's ring, Charles was forcefully legally binding her to the highest echelons of the bloodline. When reporters shoved microphones in her face, desperate for details of the proposal, Camilla deployed the tactic that would define her royal career: vague, smiling silence. She let the massive diamond do the talking. Their wedding on April 9, 2005, was not a glittering fairy tale. It was a subdued, highly complicated logistical nightmare. The ceremony had to be postponed to accommodate the funeral of Pope John Paul II, and the venue was downgraded from Windsor Castle to the Municipal Guildhall to avoid constitutional outrage. Queen Elizabeth conspicuously refused to attend the civil ceremony, only showing up for the religious blessing afterward. As Camilla stepped out of the car that day, she looked visibly terrified. She was not stepping into a magical romance, she was walking into a lifelong PR battle. But as she stood beside Charles, the ring flashing in the flashbulbs, she had achieved the impossible. She had survived. Yet as the decades passed, the survival mutated into something far more complicated. The ring legitimized her, but it did not magically erase her enemies. As Camilla settled into her role, the controversies continued to hunt her, eventually culminating in a series of ruthless internal power plays that would fracture the royal family anew. The ascent from highly despised mistress to queen consort did not happen in a vacuum. It was paved with calculated media leaks, internal palace betrayals, and the complete alienation of Charles's youngest son. In 2023, the world watched in shock as Prince Harry dropped a nuclear bomb on the monarchy with the release of his memoir, Spare. While the book took aim at the press and his brother William, its most lethal, venomous accusations were aimed squarely at the woman sleeping in his father's bed. Harry did not just criticize his stepmother, he completely unmasked her. He explicitly accused Camilla of being dangerous, alleging that she had forged a deeply unethical, transactional alliance with the British tabloids. According to Harry, Camilla deliberately sacrificed him and Meghan to the press, leaking private, damaging stories about the young couple in exchange for the tabloids, writing glowing rehabilitative pieces about her. He painted a portrait of a ruthless Machiavellian operator who would destroy her own stepsons to secure the crown upon her head. The accusations sent a catastrophic shockwave through Buckingham Palace. While the public had long suspected Camilla possessed a cunning PR strategy, hearing it validated by Diana's youngest son was devastating. King Charles was reportedly shattered. He had spent years attempting to broker a fragile peace with Harry. But the public assassination of his wife's character was an unforgivable crossing of the Rubicon. True to form, Camilla maintained a chilling absolute silence in public. But behind the heavy palace doors, insiders reported that she was incandescent with rage. The gap between the Sussexes and the crown became a permanent, unbridgeable chasm. Despite the explosive fallout from spare Camilla's march toward ultimate power was unstoppable. The coronation in May 2023 was intended to be Charles's glorious moment of unity, but it rapidly morphed into a brazen display of Camilla's newfound dominance. The optics were deeply uncomfortable. Prince Harry attended the ceremony alone, relegated to the third row, stripped of his military uniform, and fled the country just hours after the crown touched his father's head. Meghan Markle remained in California, refusing to step foot in the United Kingdom. But the true controversy of the coronation was Camilla's aggressive elevation of her own bloodline. She successfully lobbied to have her biological grandchildren serve as pages of honor, placing them front and center on the global stage, directly competing with the visual prominence of Prince William's children. Insiders reported that William and Kate were deeply uneasy with the arrangement, viewing it as a blatant attempt to blur the lines of the true royal succession. Camilla was essentially attempting to reshape the ancient institution into a modern blended family where her aristocratic relatives held unprecedented importance. It was a profound overreach, but Charles allowed it to happen. The most egregious betrayal, however, came via a quiet, insidious alteration of her official title. When Charles and Camilla married in 2005, the palace issued a legally binding press release assuring the British public that out of respect for the late Princess Diana, Camilla would only ever be known as Princess Consort when Charles ascended the throne. It was a compromise designed to pacify a hostile nation. But as the coronation approached, the palace quietly, ruthlessly scrubbed the word consort from all official documentation. She was officially crowned Queen Camilla. To the Diana loyalists, this was the ultimate betrayal, the final proof that Camilla had played a long, deceptive game of chess and won. Prince William reportedly accepted the title change through gritted teeth out of a sense of duty, but Harry viewed it as the ultimate validation of his memoir's claims. She had successfully rewritten history, and there was absolutely nothing anyone could do to stop her. Once the crown was securely fastened to her head, the velvet gloves came off. Camilla initiated a brutal, systematic purge of the royal staff. She was determined to eradicate any lingering loyalists to the late Queen Elizabeth II and replace them with her own dedicated sycophants. The most high-profile casualty of this ruthless reshuffle was Angela Kelly, Queen Elizabeth's fiercely protective lifelong dresser and closest confidant. Kelly possessed deep institutional knowledge and held immense power during Elizabeth's reign. Camilla, viewing Kelly as a threat to her new authority, reportedly orchestrated her quiet but forceful eviction from her grace and favor home in Windsor, banishing her to a much smaller property far from the center of power. It was a cold, calculated execution that sent a terrifying message to the remaining palace staff. There is a new queen, and dissent will be punished. But the ultimate test of Camilla's power arrived not from a tabloid scandal, but from a devastating biological reality. In early 2024, Buckingham Palace released a statement that paralyzed the nation. King Charles had been diagnosed with cancer. As the king retreated from public life to undergo grueling medical treatments, a massive power vacuum opened at the heart of the British monarchy. Prince William was already overwhelmed dealing with his own wife's simultaneous shocking cancer diagnosis. Into this terrifying void stepped Queen Camilla. She became the undeniable face of the crown, executing a grueling schedule of solo public engagements, meeting with foreign dignitaries, and single-handedly keeping the visible machinery of the monarchy running. To her supporters, this was her finest hour, the ultimate proof that she was a dedicated, indispensable servant to the crown. She was holding the fort while the men of the family were incapacitated. But power is an intoxicating, dangerous drug. As Camilla's visibility and autonomy skyrocketed, the delicate balance of her marriage began to fracture. The paradox was crushing. Charles was entirely dependent on her to maintain the illusion of a functioning monarchy, yet he was deeply threatened by her rising unchecked influence. The king, dealing with the psychological terror of his mortality and the physical exhaustion of his treatment, reportedly grew increasingly paranoid about Camilla's operational control behind the scenes. Was she merely acting as his proxy, or was she actively building her own shadow court? The unauthorized interview that triggered their explosive Windsor confrontation was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of Camilla testing the boundaries of her newfound supremacy. And so we return to the dark, silent rooms of Windsor Castle. The king sits alone, battling a terrifying illness and the crushing isolation of the crown. The massive Art Deco diamond sits abandoned on a polished mahogany table, casting a cold reflection in the dim light. And the queen, the ultimate survivor, who clawed her way from the gutters of public opinion to the absolute pinnacle of global royalty, is gone into the night. Will this catastrophic rupture be the end of their legendary destructive love story? Will the king, driven by his desperate need for control, permanently exile the woman he sacrificed his reputation for? Or will Camilla, armed with decades of survival instincts and an arsenal of royal secrets, orchestrate yet another miraculous return to power? The British monarchy has survived world wars, abdications, and global scandals. But the greatest threat to the House of Windsor is no longer the press, the public, or the exiled prince in California. The greatest threat is the civil war currently raging between the king and the queen. The ring has been returned. The battle lines are drawn. And the world watches with bated breath to see who will survive the final fallout.